So, Adelvis Segundo Pereira, a 29-year-old Venezuelan, entered the United States on January 2nd of this year near Eagle Pass, Texas, unlawfully. He just, crossed the Rio Grande. Uh, he was arrested the same day by U.S. Border Patrol, and but they let him go. They gave him a court summons, a notice to appear, and let him free. Now, last week, March 12th, which would have been, I believe, Tuesday, he was arrested again and taken into custody with Immigration and Customs Enforcement in San Antonio. And he is being held pending extradition to Colombia. So why am I talking about a Venezuelan who came into the U.S. illegally? This isn't an immigration show one way or the other. Obviously, this speaks to the situation at the border there in Texas and its porosity. But Pereira is on Colombia's 10 most wanted list. So he is a member of the Los Satanas, or the Satan's gang, which operates primarily in the south of Bogota. And they are an extortion and murder gang. So they basically go around and extort business owners. If you have a shop, they come by and say, give us so much money per month or we're going to blow up your shop and kill you. Or they'll just kidnap you and make your family or whoever wants you alive to pay. This stuff has been on the rise. Kidnapping had practically gone away in Colombia. It was no longer a worry. But over the last 4 or 5 years, it has seemed to be resurgent. It doesn't seem to be going away based on President Gustavo Petro's Paz Total initiative of talking with criminals and hoping that they'll behave. But the Colombian government is seeking to extradite Mr. Pereira from the United States to Colombia, which probably will happen. The two countries cooperate. The thing, though, that still I find disturbing is not only was this guy detained and just let free, but so the good thing, I guess, is he was detained the same day, but then they just let him go. I understand there may not have been an Interpol notice or anything like that. They may not have known who he was, but it does speak to the state of things at the U.S. border. But at least somehow there was communications enough for him to be identified, and he will now be probably facing justice in Colombia. The General Jose Daniel Gualdron, who is the commander, a police general in charge of Bogota, metropolitan Bogota, said that Pereira was actually still extorting people while he was on the run through Central America and Mexico, and then crossing the border into the U.S., still calling up people, threatening people, and through his subordinates, collecting, running an extortion racket, basically. So that is, I guess, good news that he's captured. But again, I think that it's concerning that not only, one, he was able to get away, which is in some degree understandable. He's on the run because the authorities are after him. But the fact that he just crosses into the border of the U.S., this super gangster criminal, and was captured and is let go. Not, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not an expert on the border situation, but I do find it concerning that that's an issue. So that's one thing to keep in mind, and we'll see what happens with the extradition process. Moving on to some good news. JetSmart, the Chilean carrier that now has a Colombian subsidiary, JetSmart Colombia, fully owned by the parent company, took its first domestic flight. The airline's been flying into Colombia internationally for some years now, connecting Colombia with other South American locations. The airline also has a code share agreement with American Airlines, who is a minority shareholder in the company. But Thursday, they operated their first flight from Bogota to Medellin. And on that same day, they also operated flights from Medellin to Bogota, and then also Medellin to and from Cartagena, the coastal tourist destination. In Bogota, keep this in mind if you're going to fly domestically on JetSmart. In Bogota, they're flying out of the Puente Ario, the Puente Ario, or Terminal 2 in El Dorado. So if you've flown into Bogota, you know they've got the big main terminal that most people go in and out of for international flights, and also if you're flying domestically on Avianca or LATAM or somebody. But there's the smaller building, the Puente Ario, or Terminal 2, which if you're coming into El Dorado in a taxi or something like that, then you'll see you pass by this big building that's still much smaller compared to the main terminal off to your right. That's the Puente Ario. And so it's important that you keep in mind that you're going to fly in and out of there, or you might get mixed up and miss your flight. There is a free shuttle bus service that runs between the two terminals. And if you're making an international connection with JetSmart, I believe you're also going to have to take that, because you're still going to come in and out of immigration in the main terminal. But then your domestic connection may be on Terminal 2. So whatever the case is, keep an eye on that and make sure that you are very clear on your terminal arrangements when flying JetSmart out of Bogota. Now, part of the announcement, the CEO, Eduardo Ortiz, who is a Chilean executive who is the CEO of JetSmart, was on hand, and we were able to speak with him. We'll have that coming up for you. But he made an announcement that JetSmart's base of operations in Colombia will actually be in Medellin. It won't be in Bogota. They'll be flying plenty of routes from Bogota, but their actual base of operations is going to be in Rio Negro, the suburb of Medellin, where the international airport Jose Maria Cordoba is located. So that's an interesting development. Certainly the Paisas are very, very proud of that. And the airline JetSmart operates as a low-cost carrier. So it will be interesting to see if they are able to bring back what Viva used to brag about, which is the effect that they had on lowering the ticket prices in every market where they operated. So if JetSmart is flying routes between Medellin and Bogota, then LATAM and Avianca and maybe even Wingo are going to have to lower their fares as well. That will certainly be welcomed as a traveler. The plane we flew on was a new Airbus A320neo. It was in very good condition, looked like it was practically new. And so coming into the terminal, there was a celebration there where there were people from both Rio Negro and the Medellin mayoral administrations, as well as people there from the governor's office of Antioquia. So that's good news, I think, and unless you're a competing airline operator, if you're a passenger, that's certainly good news. So we'll see what happens there. Keep a close eye on JetSmart. They also had people on hand from the private equity firm that invests in them, which is Indigo Partners. That's out of the U.S. There were people on hand, which I thought was really interesting, because JetSmart's a Chilean airline that is operating in Colombia, but one of the entities that they thanked, aside from Aerocivil and the Colombian government, which were, they were on hand, in the Ministry of Transportation, the U.S. Embassy was on hand, and they also had kind words to thank the U.S. Embassy for its participation in making that happen. I didn't get a chance to talk to anybody to understand the role there, but I found that an interesting note. So anyway, JetSmart's here. Now, moving on, Ecopetrol, the stock is down. We talked about this last time. Not in the past 12 months, not in the past 12 months, but just this winter, just let's say January, February, March, is down 11%. Ecopetrol is the largest company in Colombia. It is 88% owned by the Colombian government. The rest of the shares trade on, you can buy shares on Colombia's BVC stock exchange, also on the New York Stock Exchange. And they're in trouble. They're not in trouble like they're going to go out of business tomorrow or anything like that. But we have a president, and because the government owns shares in Ecopetrol, and the president is the head of President Petro is the head of the Colombian government. Petro is an outspoken anti-petroleum activist politician. It was part of his campaign platform, if you will. And so he appointed, you can have a technocratic government where you go out and say, I'm going to find the best qualified people based on their credentials and experience to run this department or this agency or whatever. Or I can find the people that are most loyal to me. And those are kind of two competing philosophies that you'll see throughout, any kind of political science or anything like that. And so what Petro has done is he took his campaign manager and put him in charge of Ecopetrol. Roa is the guy's last name. And so now he's the CEO of this petroleum giant. He is not somebody with experience running a petroleum company. But furthermore, you have anti-petroleum people running a petroleum company, which if you're anti-petroleum, that's fine. You're probably quite happy with that. If you are a shareholder, if you're a stockholder, or if you're somebody who wants your investments to do well, if you're somebody who's looking at the money that Ecopetrol brings into the Colombian government to fund all its different programs and things like that, then you're probably concerned. You could argue that if Petro wants petroleum to go away, which he does, he says so, then maybe he wants Ecopetrol to go away. So my question is that, does Petro want to end Ecopetrol? He's appointing now on March 22nd, there's going to be a shareholder vote or a board. Yeah, they're going to elect a new board of directors, and Petro's nominations, which would be the majority on the board, is comprised of, there's an anti-fracking activist, there's a feminist kind of social activist. There's nobody that has a background running, like serving on corporate boards of this type and running multi-billion-dollar companies. And so it kind of, it would be newsworthy, but the complicating factor is that Ecopetrol trades on the New York Stock Exchange, so it falls under the purview of the SEC, not the Southeastern Conference in sports, but the Securities and Exchange Commission. That means that they have to, as a publicly traded company that trades publicly in the U.S., they must follow corporate governance guidelines. And that says that the directors of a company who represent the interest of the shareholders, who have a fiduciary responsibility to represent the interests of the shareholders, must be qualified. Now, you can argue about, are they qualified, or does this, what the qualifications might mean at the finer point. But basically, when you're running a billion-dollar business, you want people with experience running billion-dollar businesses, or at least hundreds of million-dollar businesses or something like that. You don't take people and put them in control who have no business experience. Well, you can if you want to, if it's a private company, but once it becomes a public company, then you have a responsibility to the minority shareholders. So that means if you are a pension fund in the U.S., for example, or a widow or orphan or something like that, okay, and you have shares in Ecopetrol. Anybody, if you're in Colombia, you can go to the BVC and buy shares. If you're in the U.S., you could, or anywhere in the world, just about, you can open up an account and buy. If you can trade on U.S. stock exchanges, then you can buy Ecopetrol. Their symbol is EC, and you could buy shares. Now, there is a duty that the company has to protect your value, okay? And the directors of the company are, basically their job is to take responsibility and be good stewards of the asset for the shareholders. And then you have the majority shareholder, which is the Colombian government. But as sometimes time in the past elected to make this a publicly traded company, that means that they accepted the responsibility of also protecting the minority shareholders. So we'll see what happens there. Petro himself said that technocracy is supposed technicians in power. I'm translating here. Democracy is the people in power. So I don't necessarily know that that's true, but basically, like he did when and I lived in Bogota when he was the mayor, and it was a mess. The trash didn't get taken out. We had all these scandals like the Tapahueco scandal, which was this fantasy machine that they bought that was supposed to fill off the potholes in the street. And if you've been in Bogota, you know that that never happened. He put all of these thugs on the payroll of the city, basically saying, I'm going to give you a salary if you don't do crime. I'm going to pay you to, so it that kind of would encourage more kids to become thugs so that you can get free money from the government. It reminds me of, I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but uh, I've heard it enough times. It may be true, but these things are funny because you never really know. But they say that the British government wanted to eradicate cobras in, I don't know, Mumbai or New Delhi or somewhere in India. And so they put a bounty out for all like you could bring in a dead cobra and get so many rupees or British pounds or whatever. And so instead of eradicating cobras, it created an industry of cobra breeders who started growing cobras to get this money. So it actually, by paying uh, for there not to be cobras, they created more cobras. Once they realized how dumb this was, they ended the program and actually got worse because then all the cobra breeders no longer had any use for their cobras, so they just let them loose. Okay, so it's kind of the similar thing. But anyway, the qualifications back then were if you were part of his old M19 revolutionary group or were a friend or loyal supporter or activist or something like that, you got to be in city government, not because you knew about managing the budget or understanding the public resources or administration or things like that. So now Petro is president, and his health reform, his pension reform, his labor reform are all in trouble. So the labor reform isn't going anywhere. The health reform just kind of got, so in Congress they'll vote to archive, or they'll basically, they won't vote a bill down and say, okay, this bill lost, but they'll vote to not bring it up. In the U.S., you'll see bills disappear in committee. I remember when back in Columbus, Ohio, which is where I'm from, and we went to go talk to the state speaker of the House, some other people and I, about a bill that we didn't like at the time. And the the speaker said, watch, because he kind of, it was one of these populist bills where you wouldn't do well to come out vocally against it, especially because his party was kind of, a lot of the populace in his party was for this bill at the time. I don't want to get into what bill it was or when this was because we were told this in confidence. And so the guy said, just watch what happens. And so basically the bill never came up for a vote, and it was killed due to kind of maneuvering and things like that. So basically this bill, the Petro's health reform bill, which would take away, so in Colombia you have I've explained this before, but you have the EPS, Entidad Proveedor or Promotor de Salud, which is sort of like a HMO, what we would call in the U.S. a health maintenance organization. And so what happens is that your employer, if you, and there are different ones based on where you are in the country, but basically if you're an employee in a Colombian company, then when you sign up, then the company goes, okay, who's your EPS, or what EPS do you want? And there might be 5 or 6 to choose from. There might be less in some parts of the country, more in others. And so you pick your EPS. Okay, they're different brands. There's some that are kind of government run, and then there are some that are privately run. But basically you'll choose your EPS. Like you can have in Medellin, you can have Sura, which is part of the big insurance, a giant. You could pick one that maybe is run by a nonprofit. You can pick one that's maybe run by the government, like the city government in some places. Anyway, so you have a choice between your EPS provider, and you might pick them based on your satisfaction with the service you get, or whatever the case might be, or their network of doctors, that kind of thing. Now, EPS is different from an IPS, which in Spanish sounds like EPS, and then the EPS in English sounds like EPS. Okay, so IPS is an institución proveedor de salud. So that's like a clinic. All right. So a doctor's office might be EPS spelled with an I, and then the entity that kind of takes the money and pays your claims and things like that, and that you pay your premiums into, that's the EPS in English, or EPS in Spanish. Now, then you have private insurance, which is another thing, and there are some other like complementary plans that sweeten up the EPS. But basically, so what Petro wants to do is he wants to get rid of the EPSs and replace them with what he calls popular, or like community health centers. Okay, so like a community clinic. In the U.S., in some cities, you'll see, and I'm sorry, I use the U.S. because it's just what I know best, aside from Colombia. Okay, I know that you have all these other different models of healthcare in Europe and different things like that. But basically, what happens is you'll see, for example, city clinics or city-owned hospitals, public hospitals in the U.S. that are government-owned or government-run, and you'll also see kind of an equivalent of an urgent care clinic that might be run by the city or by the county, whatever the case. And where I'm from, we have Franklin County Health Department. We have Columbus has its own, and then you have the state will have its other different things as well. But anyway, so he wants to get rid of the EPSs and make basically the government in control. So you would go to whatever neighborhood you're from and sign up to some government clinic. Now, they don't exist right now. So what happens if you get rid of the EPSs, and then you have to create this infrastructure where you have to make these clinics and staff these clinics up with doctors and medical professionals from zero? It kind of reminds me of the fiasco when Petro was the mayor of Bogota. And what happened was the city would contract with, kind of like how they do with bus routes in Colombia. So you might be a private guy and you own a fleet of buses. Okay, and so you'll contract with the city or get a concession, and you'll run these routes. So like if you go down into Medellin, or Bogota, for example, you have the city buses, you have the Transmilenio, which is the big long ones, the red ones, and then you have the SITP, SITP, which are the blue ones. Okay, and then you'll still have these private buses, and the private buses will get a route, and it's controlled, so you can't just buy a bus and just run out there tomorrow and start taking people around. You have to get a route assigned to you to kind of keep it orderly. And so the trash service worked like that too. So where in Bogota, you had these private trash contractors, and the city paid them they get contracts. Okay, I've got the trash collection contract for the northeastern part of the city, or for the neighborhood of Suba or something like that, or for Chapinero, or whatever that case might be. So Petro comes in, this was back about 10 years ago, and decides, no, screw it. And we're going to cancel the contract for the trash contractors because we're going to make it a city-based thing, and I'm going to be in charge. Okay. Well, he canceled the contracts, and I don't know what he thought. So basically, but now if you're going to do this, you've got to go out and buy a fleet of garbage trucks, and you've got to hire a fleet of, thousands of garbage. It's a city of 9 million people, garbage men, and all this kind of stuff like that. It's not like tomorrow, like I'm going to take out the trash. Like today is Tuesday, is trash day. So before coming on here with you guys, I took out the trash. All right. No, you've got to this is an infrastructure that has to be built up. But he just canceled the contract. And so I lived through this. I witnessed this. No trash got taken out. Okay. And then, of course, you had the blooming and rats and bugs and everything like that. So basically now in charge of the federal government, going from that which was a failure, it was a complete fiasco. The idea is to end these health entities that, now, there's a bunch of them. I don't know how many there are in Colombia, but in any given area, like I said, you might have 5 or 6 that operate. Some places more, probably some places less. And so what happens is your employer pays a fixed amount to the EPS and every month, and or like out of your payroll, and then you pay, or matching your payroll, and then you pay a certain amount gets deducted from your payroll. It's a small amount. It's under 5 or 10%. And the price is the same. So it's not like if I choose this EPS or that EPS, it's going to make a difference to me in my pocketbook. They all get kind of a set amount of money that's adjusted by the government or whatever based on inflation and that kind of thing like that. But so you'll choose based on, they have the doctors that you like or the level of service that you get or something like that, because it's not like one costs more than the other or anything like that. But Petro's idea is for that to go away, and those are entities that could be operated by, like I said, some are businesses, some are like organizations, some are government owned, like a city might. I think Bogota owns one, for example. There's one that's like the municipal one in Bogota, and you can join that. There's another system that's kind of like Medicaid, which is, if you're poor, it's called CISBEN. So that's how, if you're not contributing because you don't have a job, even now, if you don't have a job, if you're an independent person, for example, then you're expected to go out on your own and buy and affiliate yourself with an EPS and pay the monthly premiums, and you're going to pay your part and what the employer would have contributed. So you'll find out if you're an individual down here and you, let's say, contract with like a 1099, what we would call in the U.S. So like I'm uh, a lawyer, okay, or something like that. And the government, but I'm not part of a law firm, and the government wants to hire me for a particular project, or I'm a graphic designer, and some company is going to give me a 3-month contract or something like that, or whatever. Then I will. It's more complicated than this because there are different ways that this can be structured. But basically, if I'm a freelancer, let's put it that way, then I'm expected to go and pay for what they call para fiscales, which are your EPS, your cesantías, which is hard to translate because there's not really anything like it. I've never seen anything like it outside of Latin America, but basically it's like it's hard to describe, but it's a fund that you pay into, and then they can turn around and you can use that money if you decide to go back to school or if you decide to buy a house. In some ways, it can contribute to. You can use it in retirement, but there's a separate pension fund that you have to pay into. That's another one of Petro's reforms. He wants to take that. What's a kind of a decent system right now because there's choice, but Petro wants to have a government take over that. But that's a different reform that's also failing. But anyway, so you have to pay all of these. You have to pay. It's optional, but you can pay a caja de compensación, which is kind of like a employee association. It's not a union, but it's like a benefits package association. It's one of these types of things. It's really kind of cool, actually. But it's not. They might have courses if you can, like if you had I used to have Confama, and you could take English courses. You could go and get gym discounts, or they have their own gyms you can go to. They have special credit plans to help you buy a house and down payment assistance, and they even have amusement parks that you can go to. So in Medellin, outside of Medellin and Rio Negro, Confama has Tutucan, which is an amusement park, and it's open to anyone. But if you are a member of Confama, it's so cheap it's almost free. In Bogota, Cafam has one somewhere there, and so. But anyway, you're paying all this money, and then whoever's contracting you might say, "Hey, show us that you give us receipts that you've paid all of your para fiscales, that your EPS is up to date." Because if not, then you can turn around and let's say you get hurt, then you could turn around and sue the employer. And the employer is going to go, well, you're a freelance independent contractor. And even if that's true, if you haven't paid into the EPS, the government may hold them liable for that. But basically, Petro wants to get rid of all that and make these community health centers. And so everybody has to go to the health center in your neighborhood. And it's going to be staffed by these doctors that apparently will be government employees. There's no word on if the doctors want to be government employees, because right now you'll have doctors in private practice. And so let's say there's a doctor. Now, there are some doctors that are obviously that work for hospitals. There are doctors that work for clinics. But maybe if I'm let's say I'm a internal medicine doctor or something like that, or I'm a dermatologist, okay, then I'm affiliated with whatever EPS, and patients will come to see me, and then the EPS will pay me. I'll check whatever thing in the system or whatever, and then the EPS pays me. But now under this system, these doctors would apparently become government employees. And there's no word on what happens if the doctor doesn't want to be a government employee, or where all these doctors are going to come from. But anyway, so Petro's health reform seems, at least for now, dead. His pension reform has gone nowhere. His labor reform has gone nowhere. And his frustration is boiling over. All of these big things that he has wanted to do, which frightened a lot of people. Now, maybe you are a guy or gal who loves Petro and wants him to remake the economy, which is what he pledged to do when he was running. A lot of investors were afraid that Colombia would become the next Venezuela. But the institutionalism in Colombia is sufficient that it has put the brakes on these grand changes, these fundamental changes that he wants to make. Now, remember, he won with a very thin majority. He did not win with any kind of landslide. So there's no popular mandate. He kind of has the illusion that there is, but there's no broad mandate of people demanding these changes that are in Petro's vision. So in 2018, when he was running against Ivan Duque, he was trying to get, you build coalitions and things like that. And he went after the support of Antanas Marcos, who was a former mayor of Bogota and also former presidential candidate. And to get Marcos's support, Petro signed they called it like signing in marble, but he basically promised that he would not ask for a constituent assembly, which in the U.S. I think we would call it a constitutional convention. Okay. And but now his great ideas, according to him, are being stopped. The frustration is growing to where in his latest cabinet shuffle, he's moved out what he would call the technocrats to replace them with activists and fellow travelers and people who either share his vision or are loyalists to him. And that kind of led to some of the problems that we had in the Supreme Court, where in Colombia what happens is to get an attorney general, the president sends a list of potential nominees. So the president goes, these are the people I want for attorney general. And then the Supreme Court will vote on the selections of the president. So whoever gets selected comes off of the president's list. So it's somebody that the president nominates. It's not like in the U.S. where you nominate one person and that person gets, like, if they get rejected, then you go nominate somebody else. You give the Supreme Court a list. Say, pick from this list. And the Supreme Court has to pick from the list that the president hands over. However, the Supreme Court can reject all of everybody on the list. And that happened several times. So at first, Petro had people that were very close to him, Petro loyalists. They got rejected. There were, different rounds. And now finally last week we got Luz Adriana Camargo, who was selected. She did work in Petro's mayoral administration, but it does not appear that she was very close to Petro. She was down in the way off somewhere in some administrative unit back then. So I think the best thing that she has going for her, at least to get her actually approved by the Supreme Court, which has people of all kind of different ideological bents. It's not like the Supreme Court is some anti-Petro cabal or anything like that. But you've got to realize Petro's son right now is under indictment and is facing charges of corruption. Okay, so whoever the fiscal is, whoever the attorney general is has to investigate this. other charges as well. Roa, the head of Ecopetrol, Petro's campaign manager, is under investigation for dirty money coming into Petro's campaign. Okay, and so the attorney general basically, if it's someone who's too close to Petro, then the fear is that that person is going to bury these investigations, kind of like when Barbosa, the last attorney general, was appointed by Duque. Then the people were afraid that he would, for example, not investigate the charges against Alvaro Uribe at the time, so that's kind of the fear. And so it looks like the farther away you are from Petro, then the more likely your chances of success. Now, the last candidate that looked like she was about to get it, they went and found some old tweets from her husband, who's also a like a criminal prosecutor or somebody in the justice organ of the state. But he had these old tweets. Twitter is amazing why people tweet stuff. I don't understand why anybody tweets stuff, because it just gets you in trouble. But anyway, he had these old tweets from years ago where he was saying, when they arrested Nicolas Petro, the president's son, for corruption, and there's a strong case against him. Okay, but the judge the fiscal candidate's husband, they found these old tweets where he was like, this is corrupt, this is corrupt, why the fact that they even arrested him is corrupt, blah blah blah, and all of these kind of pro Petro tweets, like that they're some kind of activist. Now the lady, she was like, look, that's my husband, I'm not part of what he said on Twitter, but that doomed her chances. And so anyway, that left Luz Adriana Camargo, who was voted. And the best thing seems to be that there's nothing controversial about her. She has a background. Her whole career has been in criminal justice. She doesn't appear to be a big political actor or in part of that politicaria, like they say, but kind of has just been really a career a prosecutor or judge. And so that's working in her favor. Now, Petro has called for a constituent assembly. He called for this yesterday. He was speaking in Cali, and this is what he promised not to do. But Petro is frustrated because he's wanted to just go and do all these things, these grand ideas that he's had that don't have a lot of political support. He likes it. His kind of little Pacto Histórico party likes it, which you've got to remember is a minority party. And there's not, he's not coming out of, which you could say is a good thing, but he's not coming out of this long political machine that's been in existence for a long time. So what happens is when you get elected and you've got to appoint all these people, you don't have a deep bench to pick from. You don't have a well to draw from of all of these competent, experienced people who maybe have these specialties, but are also on your side or share your vision. So what do I mean by that? Let's suppose if I now need to appoint somebody to the board of the Banco de la República, the Colombia Central Bank, then I expect to have bankers. Okay, I need people who understand how central banking works. But if I've been kind of a revolutionary, then that's fine, but I probably don't have a lot of bankers in my posse. Okay, so I either will have to go find a banker somewhere who is a technocrat, but is not necessarily loyal to me, or I've got to go find a loyalist who probably is not a technocrat. Okay, or probably doesn't have the mainstream experience. And this is going to be whatever country you're in or whatever political situation you're in. Because maybe what's mainstream in France is going to be different than what's mainstream in the US. That's going to be different than what's mainstream in Colombia. But you've been an outsider, and so your supporters are probably also outsiders. And so now you've got to appoint people to head justice, to head the foreign ministry, to head all of these different departments. And who do you pick? You can pick people who are well respected, but maybe aren't very close to you. And that's what he did at first. But again, he wasn't getting traction with his grand vision. So he's moved out those what he calls technocrats, and he's replacing them with loyalists and supporters and people. But the thing is, they don't have that kind of experience. Now frustrated because none of his great utopian visions are coming to pass: health, labor, pension, whatever other different ideas he has. He is he's clearly frustrated, and so yesterday he called for a constituent assembly, something that he explicitly promised not to do. Why are people afraid of that? It's kind of like a constitutional convention, where in Colombia they've had 3 or 4 of them. I think the last one was in 1991. That's when they basically rewrite the Constitution. And so right now the Constitution is what's stopping Petro. The opposition to him is using the levers, legal levers, and saying you can't do this. Or in Congress, we're going to stop your bill. Or he tried to get the power to have like decree authority over national investments. Colombia has what's called the DNP, that like the Planeación agency. And if you're going to do these big capital projects, technocrats look at them and make sure that, okay, financially they're viable and they're feasibility studies and all these things like that. Well, Petro wants his hands on the purse string where he could say, I want that idea. Go build that. Don't build that. He's come out against the freeways that they're building in Antioquia because he's like, oh, that's just serving the people in what did he say? Like Llano Grande or something, which is a nice suburb of Medellin. Really kind of class warfare type statements. They're building the freeways because there's a new port that is about to be finished on the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Urabá, and you need road capacity to get products in and out. The reason Colombia is behind other countries like Mexico when it comes to manufacturing and export is because the transportation infrastructure is so low capacity. Okay, the maximum speed limit I've ever seen anywhere in Colombia is 80 kilometers per hour. Maybe there's one higher somewhere else. 80 kilometers per hour is it's under 50 miles per hour. Okay, that's the fastest you can go. So you have a truck, and the roads aren't designed to handle much more than that. So it's expensive. I was talking to people. It's more expensive to move a container from Bogota to Barranquilla than from Barranquilla to New York. Okay, and so Colombia has this 4G road network that they're building to increase the commercial capacity of the country, which will increase its industrial capacity, which will increase the opportunity for jobs and economic growth. But anyway, rather than kind of long-term planning, because that planning department, Petro would rather rule by improvisation. And he hasn't been able to because there are strong enough institutions in Colombia. And so by calling a constitutional convention or a constituent assembly, he can get rid of all of those laws that are preventing Colombia from falling into a Venezuela, if you will, where you have a strong man, a caudillo, who can just go and do whatever the hell he wants. Okay. Now, it doesn't look like there is a path for Petro to get the support he needs, again, the institutional support to call such a convention, because you need a broad consensus to be able to do that. You need to get it through Congress and things like that. And he can't even get any of these laws through Congress. So I don't see Congress approving or supporting a measure to give more power to him, okay, or to approve a measure based on his own frustration to rewrite Colombia's constitution to fit his more of a utopian socialist vision. So we'll see where that goes. It is kind of a worrying sign. I think that when Colombia, when Petro was elected last year, a lot of people were worried, both Colombians and foreign investors and things like that. And they said, hey, is it going to be a Venezuelan, become like a Venezuela or something like that? I said, I don't think so. But while the worst nightmare has not happened, I do think that this call for a Constituent Assembly is Petro's frustration reaching the boiling point, which will make him more unpredictable. So I am concerned about that as an analyst. If I put on my analyst hat and like try to analyze the situation down here, I don't think that that is a good sign. The sky hasn't fallen, the roof hasn't collapsed yet. There's a strong Supreme Court that has so far not given him what he wants. There's a strong Congress that has not given him what he wants. And you also have, to some degree, a federal system where the departments have power and autonomy to a certain degree. And then you have cities. So you have a vibrant political scene and enough institutional structure that I think can prevent him from running pell-mell and kind of just improvising. However, it's getting more concerning, and keep an eye on this Constituent Assembly because it's not a good sign. Now, in Medellin, there's the repercussions and the drama coming out of the Quintero term as mayor. So Federico Gutierrez, who is now the mayor, elected again, has found the number 501. You think 501, a lot of people think of Levi's. That's one of their lines of jeans. But Fico turned over to so in Colombia you have the Fiscalía, which is the Attorney General that investigates the public. And then you have the Procuraduría, which is like the Inspector General, which is also kind of parallel. It's also basically an Attorney General, but specific to investigating like public figures and things like that. So they can, the Inspector General, the Procuraduría, can run you out of office. They can suspend a mayor or somebody. They can suspend, when Petro was the mayor of Bogota, Ordóñez, who was the Procuraduría at the name of the Procurador. What's the term for it? But anyway, he was basically the Inspector General. He removed Petro from being the mayor temporarily. Petro appealed and actually won the appeal in the Supreme Court. But the Inspector General is supposed to investigate public corruption and things like that. So Fico has turned over 501 allegations of corruption of the past administration, of the Quintero administration. Now, Quintero's had a big tantrum on Twitter. They've asked for copies of all these allegations, and Fico's told them to go to hell. He's like, I've turned them over to the prosecutor. I don't need to turn them over to you. The prosecutor might turn them over to you eventually. You know, I don't know how the rules of discovery work in Colombia, but basically it's like, if I think you're a robber and I say, hey, you stole my car and I'm going to go and report you to the police, okay, and I write a complaint, okay, and I give it to the police, and then you say, hey, give me a copy of the complaint. And I go, well, go to hell. Okay. Now, there's no legal thing that says I need to give you a copy of the complaint. Okay. Now, if you're in a civil trial or something like that, then, you know, you have discovery, but that's a legal process that you go through. If I turn something over to the government, to the inspection body, then you'll get to see it eventually, because the idea is that they're going to investigate you, right? And you can probably get your lawyers and say, what are you investigating me for? But a lot of the investigations are not even directly towards the mayor, but towards his administration. Now, so Quintero's trying to use that to discredit the charges or the allegations. A Congress person who's allied with him said, well, we demand that to see the charges that you've given to the prosecutors. Well, Fico said, well, you're in Congress. You're not in the, executive branch or in justice, number one. So you're just a congressman. It's just like in most countries. I don't know. I think some countries are different. I think that but I know that, for example, again, going back to the U.S. as a comparison, if you're a congressperson, just by yourself, you can't demand anything. Now, Congress can subpoena things, okay, under certain circumstances, but like Joe Congressman cannot be like, give me that investigation. Okay, you just don't have that power. You're legislative branch, not the executive branch. Same thing down here. The other point that the FICO administration made was not only are you a legislator, but you are a national legislator, and as such, you have no what happens at a city level is none of your business. So you can ask for these papers, and you're a Congress person in Bogota. We don't have to turn them over to you. Now, maybe you could say, well, he ought to just go ahead and turn them over. I'm not taking sides. I'm kind of analyzing the situation. I can see why if I was accusing somebody of corruption and I was asking for an investigation to be launched, I can see why I would not want to turn those over to the people that I expect to be investigated. Why? Because if there are some charges, let's say that you're under investigation by the Justice Department, okay? And you're under investigation because somebody has like gathered evidence and turned it over to the Justice Department, and nobody's charged you with anything yet. There are no criminal charges, but you know that an investigation is either happening or may happen. Now, the Justice Department or the FBI or whoever is not going to turn over what they're investigating you for to you, so you can go and erase all the evidence or prepare your defense or whatever. Once the charges are filed, then everything's different. Now, okay, you have the right to defend yourself, okay? But if they're doing an investigation on you, you don't get to see what they're investigating, okay? If the police are investigating you, especially if it's like you don't know that they're investigating you, or you don't know why, or you don't know what they have against you, you're not allowed. I mean, if they wanted to, they could give it to you, but they probably aren't going to give it to you until they've charged you with something. Okay, now you have something to defend yourself against. So if FICO says, no, I'm not going to give you this stuff because I turn it over to the prosecutors so they can investigate you for criminal stuff, and you want it. So anyway, that kind of is my analysis on why, on the justification, which just does seem legitimate, because until charges are filed, why would you give it to Quintero? Now, Quintero wants it. If you're a Quintero supporter, the former mayor who made a lot of enemies when he was mayor, and now has 501 allegations against him, according to the new administration. Of course, he wants those. I would want to know what allegations were against me, right? Um, but that's why you don't get them, and that's why there's no legal right to them right now. So we'll see how this plays out as well. So that's what's going on in the recent Medellin drama. So I want everybody to stay healthy, to stay safe, and to stay smart, and continue with your impeccable taste of tuning into Colombia Business Roots Recap. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot, everyone.